Welcome to the four-part series on the book, Belonging and Inclusion in Identity-Safe Schools, A Guide for Educational Leaders. My name is Becki Cohn-Vargas. I'm one of the authors, and I will be taking you on a journey through the key ideas in the book and giving you a chance to think about them and apply them to your setting, school or district or classroom. When you hear the words identity safety, does it make you think of identity theft? Many people think it does. And actually, that's an apropos metaphor. Identity theft happens when you can't operate as yourself, when your book is frozen, when your credit cards don't work, and people don't believe you're you. Well, the same thing happens on a psychic level when you have your identity stolen by attitudes and bigotry, by people who make you feel shame for who you are, or judge you by negative stereotypes. Let me tell you a little about myself. Both my parents fled Nazi Germany as youth. And in my mother's case, they kicked her out of her school, and then her family had to flee the country. And she was one of the lucky ones. And I was born hearing the stories of the bigotry they experienced, and I vowed not to allow bigotry to harm anyone, anywhere. And I became a teacher, and then a principal, and then a curriculum director and superintendent, always working for social justice and equity. Let me tell you the story of identity safety. I'm going to share my screen to do that. This is an introductory section, and I want to tell you the story of identity safety. Let's start by looking at the definition. Identity-safe schools are places, they're spaces where people feel free to be themselves, where their identities are viewed as an asset, whether it's their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, their ethnicity, their language. All these different aspects of the identity are validated and valued. And rather than forming a liability, they are allowing you to have an asset to success in life. So where did this all start? Well, it began with social psychologist Claude Steele and his groundbreaking research on stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is a phenomenon that they discovered in various studies that happens when people from negatively stereotyped groups actually worry that they might be judged by that stereotype, even if they don't believe it to be true. And so they even worry that they might inadvertently confirm it. And that actually lowers their performance. And it's been tested over and over again. And it's particularly powerful with Black and Brown students. When the stereotypes about intelligence are triggered, they perform at a lower level. It also happens with women in the area of mathematics. And it's actually been tried on many different kinds of stereotypes, all the same result. So for Claude Steele and his wife, Dorothy, that wasn't good enough to find the problem. They wanted to find a solution. And they wanted to basically inoculate students with an antidote that would stop the impact of the stereotypes that are actually in the air and affecting students. And so they created the Stanford Integrated Schools Project. And in that project, they tested out a theory. They compared 3 different points of entry of data. First, they wanted to look at what gives students a feeling of identity safety. So they surveyed 3rd and 5th grade students in integrated schools. Then they also wanted to look at what were the teachers doing in those classrooms. So it was bottom up. They didn't start with, this is going to make your child feel more identity safe. On the opposite, they started by looking at all these different things teachers were doing in those 84 classrooms, and they found the ones where more students felt identity safe. And then they compared that to the test scores, which, as Dorothy used to say, was basically called the coin of the realm. That was how they judged if kids were learning. And in the process of that, they discovered that in classrooms where students had more feeling of identity safety, there were certain things teachers were doing, certain teachers' behaviors, and that led to the students doing better in school, feeling more belonging, more sense of agency, and liking school more. So they came up with these components. This is the list of behaviors that the teachers were doing. And take a minute to look at those. Now, you might notice that some of these are very familiar to you, but the idea is that they're combined together in a context where diversity is seen as a resource, and that counteracts the negative impact of stereotype threat. That's where I come in. I was really fascinated by this, and I made it the topic of my dissertation study. I wanted to know, okay, what were teachers doing that we could replicate? And so I worked with a group of teachers, and we deeply investigated those 12 areas. And we came up with that it wasn't one set of things to do, but it was a whole approach that combined those. Then Dorothy and I got together and we put our research together and we created this book. And it was focused on elementary kids. And it's now a bestseller. And it goes through all the components and all the different things we learned that teachers did. But that opened up another question. What about the middle and high schools? They do different things, but the ideas resonated with them. Sadly, in 2017, Dorothy died of cancer, and I continued on, and I started working with two secondary leaders, equity-focused leaders, Alex Kahn and Amy Epstein, and we wrote the book, Identity Safe Classrooms, Grades 6-12. That was written during the pandemic. But then we had another question. If you're creating identity-safe classrooms, what about schools? What would happen to a child that was in an identity-safe classroom when they went out in the hallway and they were severely disciplined by a campus supervisor who didn't follow the ideas of identity safety? Or what if they were bullied and teased, even though in their classroom that didn't happen? So that led to Belonging and Inclusion in Identity-Safe Schools, the book you are reading. And we came up with a set of guiding principles. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read these in this short time, but you can find them on page 12 in the book. And they're a combination of explaining a little more about these different components that came up in the research, but also adding several really important ideas. One being that educators need to look at their own social identities and look at their own biases and implicit biases to be able to convey the feeling of identity safety to students, and that schools needed to work on all levels, that the climate, the structures, the practices, the attitudes, everything had to be pointing in the same direction, or you could be undermining the work we're doing. And the first one is basically the basis for identity safety, what makes it different from many other teaching models, and that is that colorblind teaching actually becomes a barrier to inclusion. Many teachers say, I treat everyone the same, I don't see color. But in truth, we all do. We live in a society. It's kind of like fish swimming in dirty water. We don't see it, but we're impacted by it. And it shows up with research that shows that Black and brown students are suspended and expelled at much higher rates than white students for the same things. And so I want you to imagine if you are a child, let's say you're a Mexican child whose parents come from Mexico and they crossed the border when they were and came to this country before you were born. And then you hear on the radio or on TV, or you see in social media, politicians saying that Mexicans who cross the border are rapists, they're criminals, and they're drug dealers. How are you supposed to feel? How can you help but wonder, what is wrong with me? I asked that same question growing up, hearing the bias and bigotry my parents experienced. And so colorblind teaching doesn't work. What we have to do is focus on identity safety, where all the identities are validated and treated and welcomed, not left at the door. So that is where I'm going to leave you today. There's a set of tools in the book at the end of each chapter, and I'd love you to look at page 31, which asks you to reflect on your school environment or your district environment. Ask yourself some questions. Figure out, there's a set of questions for each of these areas. How can you educate yourself? Have you done that already? Do you know your community? What are the practices already in place in your school? How can you pace yourself to bring identity safety forward? I want to close with a wonderful quote from Adrienne Marie Brown. She says, "Things are not getting worse. They are getting uncovered. We must hold tight and continue to pull back the veil. We must take the risk of leading. Liberation is no small task. It is a gift to be given such an undeniable purpose at such immense odds. Hold each other tight and let's do the work." I leave you with that. And I want you to think about these things, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you very much.